Daf Mem Gimel Amud Aleph, 5 lines from the top. We're holding in the middle of the sugya. Rav Chisda said that you cannot take a kli to collect an egg that's being laid, but you could take a kli to cover the egg. And as we explained before, that he holds that ein kli nitel el tzorach davar hanitel b'Shabbos. A kli can only be moved and taken for the purpose of something which in itself can be moved on Shabbos, not something which is muksa. You can't take a kli to be used for the purposes of covering or protecting something which is muksa. However, in a case where there's a loss of money which is commonplace, for instance, like if the egg is now, once the hen has laid the egg and it's lying around in an ashpa and people might trample on it, which is commonplace, for that they allowed to take the kli and to cover it. But not for a hatzola, which is not commonplace, which is not shliach. And therefore, you cannot take the kli to be makabel, to collect the egg that is being laid. So a further kasha on that explanation. This is Rabba's explanation of Rav Chisda. A further kasha on that is the Brisa says, "Noisnin kli tachas hadel b'Shabbos." It says that you can take a kli to collect the rainwater that's dripping. If there's a leak in the roof and rainwater is dripping, you can take a kli to collect that rainwater that's dripping in. Now, typically, that rainwater that's dripping is dirty, is considered muksa. There's no use for it. People wouldn't drink with it. It's not clean. And nevertheless, you can take the kli to collect it, even though it's for the purpose of something which is muksa. And l'chaira, this is not shchiyah. This is not commonplace. It's not common to have a leak. And you see that it is still mutter. More answers. We're talking in a situation where it is commonplace, where it is shchiach. We're talking in a situation where it's a new house, and a new house has leaks. It's common to have leaks until the house is used a little bit. They find out where the leaks are. They repair them. But a very new house, it is common to have leaks. So therefore, it's considered hatzola, that is shchiach. So that is one approach. That is one approach to the chilik and Rav Chisda's din, where he says ein noisen kli tachas karnas lekabel beit salsa, aval kaifen kli al shaloi tishavim. Rav Yosef, he has a different approach. Amar hainu time the Rav Chisda. The reason for Rav Chisda is mishum to come about the klim heichanai. The reason is not because ein kli nitel el tzorach davar hanitel. There's no restriction on taking a kli that in itself is not muksa, even if it is for the purpose of a davar which is muksa. There is no such restriction. What is the problem? The problem is mevatla kli mehechane. If you're going to now be makabel the beya in the kli, then you won't be able to move the kli anymore. The kli will be a basis for the davar aser. It'll be a base for the muksa. So it in itself now cannot be moved. And therefore, as we discussed earlier, it's also midrabanan because it looks like boina, it looks like you're cementing it in, or it looks like seiser, that you're nullifying the kli from its use. It can't be used anymore. Rashi in 2 different places explains it differently. So that is the yisr. That is why you cannot be makabel, you cannot collect the beya in the utensil, but to cover it is mutter. So now we're going to ask all these cases that we brought before. Now we're going to ask on this explanation of Yosef's explanation of Rav Chisda. The following kasha chaviz shel tevel shenishbara. If you have a barrel of tevel that was broken. So again, tevel is muksa. You can't eat it. You can't eat the produce, the grains. You can't eat it until Trumas and Maisers have been separated. In the interim, it's tevel, it's also ba'achila. So therefore it's muksa. And it says, maybe kli achero. You can bring a kli to collect it. So it doesn't go to waste. You can bring a kli to collect it. So doesn't that show you that we don't say that there is a problem? Amalei, he answers, no. Tevel muchnu etzel Shabbos. This is not considered mevatel kli me'echonai. This is not considered nullifying the use of the kli. Why is that? Because tevel is muchen etzel Shabbos shim avar v'tikna mesuken. Now, even though it's also midrabanan to be mafresh trumas and maasros, but that's an isser derabanan. Midaraisa, there's no isser to be mafresh trumas and maasros on Shabbos. So therefore, even though it's also midrabanan to be mafresh trumas and maasros, but if someone was mafresh the trumas and maasros, the food becomes mutar ba'achila. So therefore, it won't be necessarily also the entire Shabbos. It's considered muchen etzel Shabbos because if someone was mafresh the trumas and maasros, therefore it will become mutar, and therefore it's not muksa anymore. Therefore, it's not considered that you're being mevatel the kli mehechonai, because it's not necessarily going to be also betiltul for the entire Shabbos. Next catch from the other brayso, nice and kli tachs and elakabel sin saitza is you can bring a kli to collect the sparks that fly from a nair on Shabbos. Why did you say the sparks are muksa and mevatel kli mehechonai? Rav Huna B'rei Rav Yeshua, he answers, Nitzaitzes ain't bam mamish. Nitzaitzes don't have any mamish. Therefore, it doesn't remain. It doesn't have any physical properties. It's just gas, and therefore, after it fell into the kli, you're allowed to be metaltal the kli because the nitzaitzes don't exist anymore. They just disperse into the air. Ask another kasha. It says you can take a beam that was broken. You can support it with a bench or with the headboards or sideboards of a bed. You can support the beam that's broken and support the roof, the ceiling. You can support it with these items with a bench or ruchas hamita. So are you now not being mevatel kli mehechonai? Are you not being mevatel the kli mehechon over there? Now this question is a little bit different over here, because this is not so much a question of a muksa dika item that it's a bosses l'davar ha'aser. It is that it will remain in place and you cannot remove it anymore. It'll stay in place. It'll be stuck in its place. The Gemara answers, no, we're talking in a place where the Rafi, that he only supported it, it's very loose. The Iboye Shakile, because therefore it's very loose and he can remove it. He can put it in and take it out. It's done in a very loose way. So therefore, it's not going to remain there the entire Shabbos, and he's not going to be mevatel it over there. Masakash from the case, nice and kli, tachsadel v'shabbos. It says you can collect the rainwater. The case that we just had, you can collect the rainwater in a kli. So don't you see? Even though the rainwater l'chayr is muksa, and you're collecting this muksa item in the kli, are you not being mevatel kli mehechon? And yet we say that it's mutar. More answers, but delef haroy, specifically in a case where it's delef haroy, where it's not muksa, where it's not dirty water. It's not dirty. But in a chanami, he holds if it would be dirty. Rav Yosef makes no such distinction between something which is commonplace or not commonplace, or sola mitzuya or ena mitzuya, and therefore he holds that if it would be dirty, even if it would be a new roof, it still would be awesome. But we're talking where it's not muksa. Another kasha, kaifen esasal lifnei hafroichim she'alav says you're allowed to turn over a basket and for the chicks so that they can climb up and come down from them. Now, doesn't the chicks, the balchai, are muksa? We can't use them, they can't shach them on Shabbos, they're muksa, and nevertheless, you can bring the basket for the purpose of the davar that's muksa and have them climb up and go down from the basket. So, don't you see that there is no problem of being mevatel kli mehechonai? The more answers, kasavra mutar l'taltale. The more answer is no. He holds that it's mutar to be metaltalet. That after the chicks have gone down from the basket, you can carry the basket. It's only also once they're there, when they're on the basket. But once they've climbed down from it, he holds that it's mutter to be metaltal the basket. So you're not being mevatel the kli mehechana, even though for that time, for that moment when the Ephraim are on the basket, you can't be metaltal it because they're muksa and it's a bosses, but they'll climb down from it. And once they do, then it's mutter. And so therefore you're not being mevatel kli mehechana. But we learn in the Brisa that no, that it is also to be metaltal. Says no, that's void and ola. That's only when the chicks are on the basket. When they're there on the basket, you have a davar muksa on the basket. Then it's also. But when they come down, then it's mutar. Also, the Brisa says even when it's not oilalav, it's still also. This that it says that it's also to take them the entire Shabbos, even when they've climbed down from the basket, that's when the chicks are on the basket, the entire Bein HaShmoshes. There we say, therefore we say, if they're there on the onset of Shabbos, when Shabbos comes in, they're then the entire Bein HaShmoshes, that they're also at the onset of Shabbos, so it's Mekatzadas, they're also for the entire Shabbos. That's when we say when the chicks are on, even when they're off, they're also the entire Shabbos. But we're talking in this case over here where he did not place it there at Bein HaShmoshes. So the chicks were not on the basket Bein HaShmoshes. Therefore, if you put the basket on Shabbos, the chicks are on it. When their Ephraim are on it, it's like also to be metaltal. But when they climb down from it, then it's mutter to be metaltal. And that's the case we're talking about. And therefore, we say, therefore, it's not being mevatel the kli mehechonai, because it's only also when they're on it, but when they climb down, it's mutter. Rav Yitzchak. So now Rav Yitzchak has a different approach. He says, no, we had one approach that was Rabba's approach, that there's a chilik between a tzala to be something that really we say en kli nittel, it's rolled over nittel. But when there's a case where there is a loss, a commonplace loss, where Atzola Mitsuya, they were matered. Atzola Sheina Mutter, and Mitsuya, they weren't matered. Rav Yosef said the approach was not that Enkli Nittel, it's Ordora Nittel. His approach is that it's Yermavatal Klimechonai. Yermavatal Klimechonai. So, to collect the Ephraim, the Beya rather, you're mevatel kli me'achana. To cover it, you're not mevatel kli me'achana. And he makes no such chiluk between Hatzola Mitsuya or Hatzola She'ein Mitsuya. But Rav Yitzchak says, Kishem She'ein Noisen Kli, Tachas Tarna Goyes L'Kabel Beit Solsa, Kach Ein Koifen Al Kli B'Shvil Shloi Tishova. He holds no, he argues on Rav Chisda, and he says there's no chiluk between covering it or collecting it. Why is that? Kasavar en kli nittel elu dovra nittel b'Shabbos. He says that a kli is only nittel for a tzorach nittel b'Shabbos. You can only move the kli for the purpose of something which is not muksa. You can't be metaltal kli for the purpose of a muksa item. And he makes no such distinction between Hatzola Mitsuya and Hatzola She'eina Mitsuya. As opposed to Rabbi, he makes no such distinction between Hatzola Mitsuya and not. So therefore, he holds that in both cases, it's also to be metal to the kli, whether you're collecting the beya or you're covering the beya. So all the cases that we had before that we asked the kashas, Vishani B'tzarach L'Mekayla. And he answers it. How can he answer? He can't answer that it's talking where it's Hatzola Mitzuyim. And he can't answer it that we're talking in a case where he's saying that you're not being mevatel the kli me'echana, because that's not the distinction he makes. So he answers it b'tzarach l'mekayim, that the reason you're carrying, you're only allowed to do it in all these cases to collect the rainwater, to support the beam, for the nitzaitzas, for the tevel. It's only mutar if initially you have the kli. You want to remove the kli because you need the spot, you need the place where it's resting. So you're allowed now to pick it up and move it You're moving it not for the davar muksa. You're initially moving it because you want to remove it from this place. You want to use the place that it's sitting on. So you want to remove it. Once you're allowed to do that, which is mutter, then you're allowed to now take it even for a davar muksa. But if you have no purpose that's mutter on Shabbos, the only purpose for moving the kli is for the purpose of the davar hamuksa, then we say ein kli nitel ala tzorach davar nit. It's aser, and there's no distinction between atzol and mitzuya, atzol she'ein mitzuya. So in all of these cases, the only reason it's mutter is because initially you were allowed to remove it because you needed the place that it was resting on. You wanted to put something on that place, on the table or the chair, whatever it is, you wanted to use it. So therefore, initially you were allowed to move this kli. Once you're allowed to move it to begin with, you're allowed to take it even for the purpose of a davar muksa. Tashma, I'll ask you a question. Achas beya shenolda b'Shabbos, achas beya shenolda b'Yontiv, ein metaltalin. Whether the beya was nold on Shabbos or Yontiv, it's muksa, it's noilad. You can't be metaltan. Loy lechasas boy es a kli. V'litzma kariyam mita. You cannot take this egg, not to cover a container with it, a vessel with it, or not to use it as a support for a bedpost. If an egg, if you put it straight upright, it's very, very hard, and it can support a lot of weight. But this is noilad, it's muksa, it cannot be used to cover a kli or as a support for a bedpost. Aval kaifala kli b'shil shloit tishaver. But you could take a kli and cover this egg shloit tishaver, so it doesn't break. Well, answer is hachanam, it's tzorach l'mekayma. We have to say it's talking in a specific case where it's tzorach l'mekayma. Tashma, I'll ask you another question. Person machzolos al gabi avonim b'Shabbos. You're allowed to take a mat and take that mat to cover stones on Shabbos. Now the stones are muksa, and yet you're allowed to take a mat. They were talking about stones which are, for instance, made out of lime, which if there's a heavy rain, it will dissolve it, it will ruin it. And for some reason, he wants to protect these stones. So the stones are muksa, but he's allowed to take the mat, the machzolos, to cover and to protect these stones. So don't you see that a kli is nittel, even letzorach hadavar she'eina nittel, the stones are muksa, and yet you can take the machzolos to cover the stones. Now, as Tosfos points out, we could answer very easily, like we answered in all the other cases, but tzorach l'mekayma. We could give this teretz. Tosfos says in this case, and the other case that the Gemara is going to ask from, and the Gemara knows we could give this teretz with tzorach l'mekayma, but the one more wants to see if there is another teretz which is perhaps less dochuk, and if there's another possibility, another way to for these cases. So the Gemara answers, yes, there is. We're talking about stones which are not muksa. We're talking about avonim mikrozolis. In those days, they used to use for the bathroom. They didn't have paper. They used to use stones, sharp stones. So that's the type of stone we're talking about, where the Rabbanan were materit, mishum kavod abrius, and it's not muksa. So there's no problem. It's not davar nitol, l'sorach davar she'eina nitol. It's for the purpose of something which is not muksa. It says you can put a mat on bricks on Shabbos. Now bricks l'chayra are muksa. They're used for building materials, and which is also on Shabbos. L'chayra it's muksa. These are bricks. My answer is no. Again, it could give it a teretz b'sorach l'mekayma, but we're talking about bricks which are not muksa. We're talking to ishtar mibinyana. He's completed the building already, so he's not going to be using them for building. The chazon l'mizgalaya, so he's using them as a bench. You can sit on them. So therefore, it's not muksa. They're not designated for binyan, and they're going to be used. They're used as a bench. It's not muksa. Tashma, person machzolos al gabi kaveres dvorim b'Shabbos. You're allowed to take a machzol to cover a beehive on Shabbos. Now, a beehive has bees. Bees are muksa. Now, you're using it to protect this beehive. B'cham ipnei achama, and the summer and the sun, it's protected from the sun. B'sham ipnei achama, in the winter from the rains. U'b'levad shel yischav and lotzed, but you can't do it in a way that you're going to trap the bees. You can't do it in a way where your intent is to trap the bees and you're in fact trapping them, you're being tzad. That's a malacha. But to do it in a way where you're not trapping the bees, but you're protecting the beehive, it's mutter. Now l'chayra, the beehive is muksa. Bees are muksa, and yet you can take the machzels for the purpose of a dovar which is not nital on Shabbos. More answers, no, it's not muksa because there's honey in the honeycomb. In the beehive, there's honey, and therefore honey is not muksa, so it's for the purpose of something which is not muksa. Well, that's fine in the summertime where the ika devash, where there's honey. But what are you going to say in the winter? There's no honey in the winter. What are you going to say there? And l'chayra, therefore, you're doing it to protect the bees, and the bees are muksa. So don't you see that you could take some litzorach davar she'eina nittel? Gemara says lo nitzorach lo isen shtei chales. No, there's always two honeycombs. There's two chales of dvash remaining. The honeycomb is not emptied out completely. They don't empty out the honeycomb completely from honey because they use it to feed the bees. So there's always some honey in it. Gemara will ask on this, and we'll see Bez Hashem in the next year the Shakal V'Tarya.